What has happened fundamentally? The highest values have devaluated themselves. This is how Nietzsche diagnosed nihilism, not as mere philosophical position, but as the inevitable outcome of Western civilization's internal logic. In The Will to Power, he meticulously dissected how he arrived at this crisis of meaning. For Nietzsche, nihilism was not random. It emerged specifically from Christian morality's self-destruction. Christianity's absolute truth-seeking eventually turned against itself, revealing that no absolute truth exists. This is why Nietzsche insisted that nihilism could only arise in a Christian apocalyptic context. When the promise of absolute meaning collapses, the absolute meaningless follows. But nihilism is not simple. Nietzsche identified three distinct stages we must understand. First comes passive nihilism. The first stage in Nietzsche's anatomy of meaninglessness is passive nihilism. This passive nihilism represents not a rebellion against meaning, but its quiet extinction. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche describes this stage as decline and recession of the power of the spirit. It's crucial to understand that this is not an active rejection of meaning. It's a tired acceptance that meaning has slipped away. The passive nihilist emerges when Christian metaphysics collapses under its own weight. Having lost their absolute framework of meaning, these individuals don't rage or rebel, they simply deflate. The response to the death of God is not despair but exhaustion. This is what Nietzsche meant by weak nihilism. The passive nihilist lacks the strength even for despair. They continue living, working, consuming, but without any real conviction or purpose. They are what Nietzsche called the last men, those who have lost all great aspirations. The hallmark of passive nihilism is its comfort with meaninglessness. These nihilists don't seek new meanings or fight old ones. They simply adapt to living without meaning altogether. They become what Nietzsche described as small pleasure seekers, finding contentment in minor comforts and distractions. This stage is particularly dangerous because it masks itself as wisdom. The passive nihilist often appears as the reasonable one, the mature person who has accepted reality. They mistake their exhaustion for enlightenment and their resignation for wisdom. But for Nietzsche, this response to meaninglessness was the worst possible outcome. It represents not just the loss of meaning, but the loss of the will to meaning. The passive nihilist has lost not just their values, but their capacity to value. This is why Nietzsche saw passive nihilism as a form of spiritual illness. It's not just that these individuals believe in nothing, they have lost the strength to believe at all. Their spirit has become too weak even to suffer properly from meaninglessness. The great danger of passive nihilism is its contagious nature. It spreads not through argument or violence, but through exhaustion. It offers the seductive promise of peace through resignation, of comfort through lowered expectations. Yet this stage must be understood as exactly that, a stage. It's not the end point of nihilism, but its beginning. It's the first response to the death of meaning, but not its final word. And understanding this stage is crucial for recognizing how nihilism evolves into its more active forms. Then emerges active nihilism, which is the second stage. Active nihilism marks a dramatic shift from passive acceptance to violent rejection. This is what Nietzsche called the sign of increased power of the spirit, though not yet its highest form. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche describes this stage as characterized by destructive energy. The active nihilist does not merely accept the death of meaning, they become its agent. They take up the hammer not to build, but to destroy. This stage emerges when the spirit regains enough strength to rage against meaninglessness. Unlike passive nihilists, active nihilists feel the full pain of living in a meaningless universe. Their response is to attack remaining structures of meaning. The active nihilist sees all claims to meaning as lies that must be exposed. They become what Nietzsche called violent force of destruction, targeting not just religious beliefs but all forms of meaning-making, morality, culture, tradition, or even reason itself. This destruction is not mindless, it's methodical. The active nihilist uses logic and critical thinking to dismantle meaning. They turn truth seeking against itself, showing how every truth claims ultimately undermines itself. What makes this stage particularly powerful is its moral dimension. The active nihilist sees themselves as more honest than believers. Their destruction becomes a form of integrity. They are willing to face what others would not. But this stage has its own paradox. The active nihilist must believe in truth to destroy truth. They must value honestly to devalue all values. This internal contradiction drives them toward the next stage. The active nihilist's strength is real but limited. They are strong enough to destroy old meanings but not yet strong enough to create new ones. They are caught in what Nietzsche called incomplete nihilism, able to tear down but not to build up. Yet, this stage is crucial for what comes next. Through destruction, active nihilism clears the ground for potential creation. It's a necessary purging, a spiritual chemotherapy that kills meaning to save the possibility of meaning. This is why Nietzsche saw active nihilism as superior to passive nihilism, even while recognizing its limitations. It represents the spirit regaining its strength, even if that strength is initially poorly negative. Finally, there is complete nihilism. Complete nihilism represents what Nietzsche called the divine way of thinking, the final and most crucial stage of the nihilistic process. It's here that nihilism either destroys completely or transforms entirely. In The Will to Power, Nietzsche describes this stage as the point where nihilism becomes self-conscious of itself as a problem. The complete nihilist faces not just the absence of meaning but the meaning of that absence. This stage emerges when the spirit gains enough strength to face meaninglessness without either resignation or rage. The complete nihilist stands at the edge of the abyss and neither retreats nor leaps. They learn to dance. What makes this stage complete is its total confrontation with meaninglessness. Unlike passive nihilists, they don't avoid the void. Unlike active nihilists, they don't just attack it. They face it completely without comfort or consolation. This is where Nietzsche's most radical insight appears. Complete nihilism is not just destructive, it's potentially creative. When all absolute values are truly dead, we might finally learn to create values that don't pretend to be absolute. The complete nihilist achieves what Nietzsche called transparency. They see through all meaning-making without becoming trapped in meaninglessness. They understand that meaning is not discovered but created. This stage requires the greatest strength of spirit. It demands what Nietzsche called amor fati. It means the love of fate, including the fate of meaninglessness. It means embracing the void without trying to fill it with false consolations. But this embrace is not resignation. Complete nihilism opens the possibility of what Nietzsche called positive nihilism, the recognition that the absence of inherent meaning allows for the creation of meaning. This is where the Übermensch becomes possible, not as an escape from nihilism, but as its fulfillment. The complete nihilist becomes capable of creating values while knowing they are creations, of making meaning while knowing it's made. This final stage thus represents not the end of meaning, but its transformation. It's the point where nihilism turns back on itself and opens the possibility of a new kind of meaning, one that doesn't pretend to be eternal or absolute, but is no less powerful for being human, all too human. But this is precisely why Nietzsche saw nihilism as necessary. It's not our final destination, it's a transition. Through nihilism's destructive fire, he believed new creation becomes possible. Only by facing the complete death of meaning can we learn to create meaning anew. This is Nietzsche's crucial insight. Nihilism is not just a philosophical problem to be solved. It's a historical process we must pass through. The death of God. The death of God means the collapse of all absolute values, oh, listen, the death of God is not something we can simply reverse or escape. We must go through it completely. But beyond nihilism lies possibility. Having lost all given meaning, we might finally learn to create meaning. Having lost all absolute values, we might finally learn to value without absolutes. This is what Nietzsche meant by philosophizing with a hammer, which means breaking old tablets so new ones might be written. The crisis of nihilism thus becomes an opportunity. Through this great noon of meaninglessness, through this complete death of old values, something new might emerge. Humans who can create meaning in a meaningless universe, who can dance even in the void. This is Nietzsche's challenge to us, not to escape nihilism, but to pass through it completely. Not to restore old meanings, but to become strong enough to create new ones. For only those who have faced absolute meaninglessness can truly understand what it means to create meaning. We stand now where Nietzsche pointed, like at the crossroads between destruction and the creation, between the death of old values and the birth of the new ones. The question is not whether we will face nihilism, but how we will face it, and what we might become through facing it. Nietzsche did not simply diagnose nihilism from a distance, he lived it. His philosophy was not born from academic detachment, but from an existential confrontation with despair. His own physical suffering, isolation, and rejection by society shaped his ideas. He faced the void, personally, and emerged with a philosophy of overcoming. Additionally, we have to touch epistemological nihilism, because we have to, but very slightly. Epistemological nihilism claims that objective truth and objective knowledge don't exist, and that realization can easily plunge us into despair. It tells us, what's the point of knowledge if everything is subjective? But Nietzsche is the perfect escape from that kind of nihilism. He does not deny epistemological nihilism. In fact, he says, you are damn right, absolute truth don't exist. But instead of falling into hopelessness, he challenges us to create our own truth, even if they are subjective. And not just for the sake of truth itself, but to use knowledge as a tool for our will to power. For Nietzsche, knowledge is not about discovering an objective reality. It's about creating perspectives that serve life, growth, and strength. It's about taking control of the chaos and turning it into something that empowers us.